So again, my name is Kevin Berend. I'm going to be talking about monitoring wilderness character on Grand Staircase-Escalante National Monument. So first, what I'll be talking about, wilderness study areas, or WSAs, what they are and where they are. I'll be talking about wilderness character, that is how we define wilderness and measure it. I'll be talking about a grant-funded project that GSEP did last year to monitor WSAs at Grand Staircase-Escalante National Monument. And then finally, what that monitoring means for stewardship and the future of these lands. But first, before I go any further, I need to start with a disclaimer, and that is that wilderness is, of course, a nebulous concept. I'd say the word, it means something different to everyone, probably in this room. And this presentation could easily be an entire semester course just on what wilderness is and all its meanings and connotations in itself. But of course, wilderness is really a Western-centric concept that was brought by Europeans. But it's especially and uniquely American in the sense that it's tied to the idea of the frontier and advancing into what was assumed to be unoccupied or virgin land. Of course, now we know that that was never the case. Indigenous peoples, of course, have been here for tens of thousands of years, as we just heard. And in many cases were removed from ancestral lands to pave way for wilderness, including in places like the national parks. And land management in many ways is still beholden to some of that kind of old, outmoded ideas. But now this term wilderness really is used as an administrative label, as Fritz just mentioned, for lands that retain a certain quality, as defined by the Wilderness Act of 1964. And in this presentation, I'll be using that legal or technical definition. So then the Wilderness Act. The Wilderness Act of 1964 was a landmark piece of legislation that established the National Wilderness Preservation System. The Act's purpose is to preserve and protect natural ecosystems and wild areas, and also to provide opportunities for solitude and retrospective or primitive recreation. The Wilderness Act outlines the specific qualities, which it calls wilderness character, that define wilderness and distinguish it from all other lands. Wilderness Study Area, or WSA, is a temporary designation that applies to lands that have wilderness characteristics, but that have not been officially designated as such. And nationwide, the BLM manages some 8.7 million acres of wilderness, including those 487 different WSAs that Fritz just mentioned. And across all federal agencies, there's about 109 million acres of wilderness. And the Wilderness Act defines 5 qualities of wilderness character. Untrammeled means that wilderness is essentially unhindered and free from the intentional actions of modern human control or manipulation. Natural means that ecological systems are substantially free from the effects of modern civilization. Undeveloped means that wilderness is essentially without improvements or the sights and sounds of human occupation. Solitude or primitive and unconfined recreation. Wilderness presents outstanding opportunities for people to experience solitude or primitive and unconfined recreation in wilderness, including the benefits and inspiration derived from physical and mental challenge. And then other features of value. This refers to site-specific values that are specific to any given wilderness or WSA. And that could be things like cultural sites, geology, or paleontology. So BLM is mandated to monitor the wilderness character of WSAs under its purview, so as not to impair the suitability of such areas for preservation as wilderness. This is called the non-impairment standard, as is defined in guidance. However, no nationwide or standardized strategy, there is no nationwide or standardized strategy across BLM as to how to ensure that WSAs are meeting that non-impairment standard. And so in 2023, GSEP was awarded a grant from the BLM National Landscape Conservation System for a pilot program to monitor 3 WSAs on Grand Staircase-Escalante National Monument. There were 2 main practical problems that guided the development of that project. And they are, how is wilderness character changing over time at Grand Staircase? And how do stewardship activities affect attributes of wilderness character? But the key to answering these questions is, of course, monitoring. But in coming up with the protocols for how to conduct that monitoring, we realized something quickly, and that is that many attributes of wilderness character are intangible. They can't be observed or measured directly. How do you quantify something like solitude, for example? So instead, we have to look for impairments to wilderness character, which we ended up calling intrusions. So intrusions are things like vehicle trespasses, camp areas, trash, graffiti or vandalism, human waste, or permanent installations. BLM guidance regarding monitoring says that the approach should be, quote, useful, simple, and practical. And intrusions meet this criteria because they are specific, quantifiable observations that detract from some aspect of wilderness character. Also, intrusions can become a target for stewardship activities that preserve suitability for wilderness designation. And these are just some examples of that, of this one here, graffiti and vandalism, that we use as examples for training. So then, where are WSAs on Grand Staircase? So this is, of course, the entire monument. The WSAs are these darker yellow areas within the monument, and there are a total of, I should know this offhand, 18. One of my GSEP colleagues will correct me probably, or someone at BLM. I think it's 18, something like that, total on Grand Staircase. But we ended up focusing just on this northeast portion here, on 3 WSAs on the monument, and they are the Phipps Death Hollow, North Escalante Canyons, and Scorpion WSA. And the reason being is that these really receive the highest amount of visitation. They're the closest to Escalante in terms of proximity and allow the best accessibility for volunteers. And so for each of these, in designing protocols, we reviewed the Utah Wilderness Inventory, which was put together in 1999, for the descriptions, the detailed descriptions of the WSAs and any supplemental values that are listed, and then reviewed existing BLM data, including paper forms that have been collected by Bob Stevenson going back, I think, about 20 years now. We also were gifted some data from JBL at BLM that was collected by both Penn State and Northern Arizona University that had some older intrusion data that we were able to help target where we actually went and did this monitoring within these WSAs. So then the monitoring itself. So how we actually did this. We developed a smartphone app using Survey 123 that allowed the collection of impairment data. And that being the type, the level of intensity, whether previous mitigation efforts were present. The smartphone app, this is in a screenshot of what it looked like on the right. It was a series of drop-down menus, essentially. And what it did was allow us, any volunteer to be in the field, select, if they found an intrusion, select exactly what it was, and then fill out some basic descriptors about it. And most of these, again, were drop-downs. And then the really useful features, what it also did as well, is it automatically took a GPS coordinate that logged where that intrusion is, and then allowed for them to take a photo directly on their cell phone, and that would become linked to this, this record in the data. Let's see, and then we also had a section at the end that we're trying to focus on some of those more qualitative aspects of wilderness character, like signage, water diversions, non-native species, pollution, the number of vehicles, people, and dogs that volunteers encountered along the way. We selected 27 hiking and driving routes across the 3 WSAs. These were mostly the most popular routes and trails, and Digit Lab at Utah State University helped us create some of these really great customized maps for each of the volunteers. And then finally, we partnered with Adventure Scientists, which empowers conservation groups and researchers by providing qualified volunteers for collection of scientific field data. We posted our project to their platform, and GSUP was able to screen applicants based on their skills, interests, and local knowledge. And then in April 2024, we brought all of our volunteers to Escalante for 2 days of training. So the first day was an office day where we trained everyone how to use the app. We went over their maps and routes, talked about leave no trace, safety and communication, including the physical dangers that they might encounter, and provided a campsite and all the meals for them during that day, during the entire training. And on day 2, we all went out into the field to practice data collection so that they could see some examples of intrusions in the field, get to practice with the app, and then, of course, familiarize themselves with the area and the terrain. The third day is when we sent them out on the routes to begin monitoring. So the volunteers worked in pairs, and they stayed in contact with GSUP staff using GPS devices the entire time, for one, in case of emergency, but also to help answer questions if they came across something that they didn't know how to deal with. We were able to help them figure it out. And so results. So we ended up with 14 volunteers who collected 184 intrusions across those 3 WSAs, 17 tracks. These were things like if a volunteer came across, let's say, a vehicle trespass that was going into a WSA, there was an option in the smartphone app where they could actually draw points and show us on the map where and how far that intrusion went into the WSA. The final collection of all the data looks like this in ArcGIS Online. So that's the one great feature about doing it this way, is that all the data automatically is incorporated into ArcGIS Online, and including all the attributes. So we have this trove of data now that is already being used by GSUP's stewardship program to help them go out and target where are some areas where we could go do remediation on some of these intrusions. But there's a lot more in-depth analysis that we're still working on. So specifically, we're interested in correlations among some of these intrusions, things like vehicle trespass intensity versus like the type of trespass, so whether it be a car or OHV or bike. Are vehicle trespasses associated with campsites, for example? Do they always lead to a campsite, or are the ones that maybe just kind of go nowhere and peter out? And then finally, we're also interested in how it relates to platforms like AllTrails, which of course are very popular for folks who are looking to recreate in these 3 WSAs. Where the intrusions are happening, do those tend to line up with actually where most of the main recreation is happening as well? So those are questions that we're still going to be working on up through about this fall of this year. And looking towards the future, ideally we would be repeating this monitoring. As I mentioned at the outset, in order to really be able to answer the questions about whether wilderness character is being retained, we have to be able to track it over time. So this pilot program is really a baseline, and we need to come back and keep doing it again in order to be able to see a trend over time. We'd also like to survey more WSAs on Grand Staircase, ideally all of them, so that we can kind of start this recurring pattern across the entire monument. And then finally here, it's BLM's decision, of course, whether WSAs are actually meeting that standard. But the final authority rests with Congress to whether or not to actually officially designate them as capital W wilderness or not. And finally, just a little bit of note about how this relates to land management. So this connection between knowing what the conditions are on the land and the connection between that and then the policy really helps us to improve wilderness stewardship. It helps us to clarify how management decisions and actions influence trends in wilderness character over time. It helps to improve communication among staff and with the public about wilderness stewardship. And then finally, create a legacy of experience and knowledge about wilderness locally and then broadly within the agency. And that's something that I hope GCEP can remain a part of going forward. And then finally, just a huge thank you to everyone who helped and was involved in this project at BLM, Jay Beal, Bob Stevenson, Fritz Glasner, from Adventure Scientists, Elisa and Devin, and then my GCEP colleagues, Caitlin Martin, Kristen Buck, and Victor Colan. And then of course, all of our volunteers who we could not have done this project without. Thank you all.